I'm Krista, I'm an addict.
I'm Grayson, I'm not, and welcome back to episode 13. Back with another episode.
So I think it is very important for instance, my family and friends have been through different things with me, like in and out of recovery, trying to get clean, like what works, what doesn't. And I think it is important for, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like those family members and stuff to be more vocal about like what didn't work and what has worked, like, and just like me as a recovering addict, like I get on here and share my experience on what has worked and what hasn't, that way to just try to save someone, save their life, or just save some time of not having to like stay out there for so long. So like my parents in the past have tried different ways, different angles to deal with me, and try to get me clean and help. That's what we were talking about. Like there were a couple times where my parents would sit me down and just be like, what do we do? Do you need to talk to a therapist? Do we need to go to rehab? And I mean, ultimately, until the addict's ready, none of that's going to matter. However, there's still things that the family can do to protect their family member, I think. Do you have any?
I agree 100%, and I think we've talked a lot about like communication and being open, and you can kind of touch on like what worked for you and what didn't. But I know as a family member, like I can sit here and say like call them out and be open and stuff like that, but that's a hard thing to do. Like it's hard when you think you can do it. Like I remember times, like, because I always knew when you were using, but like I remember times thinking like what I like trying to like think like what could I say that could like try to change this or this and that. But it's hard. Like when you get to them face to face, it's not as easy as it sounds as just calling them out. But I think that is a good thing to do. You can tell me from your perspective, but being open about like what do you need to help you, like not necessarily going at it as a way of like what have you done, what are you doing to your life, more so like what can I do to help you. Like it's hard. You almost, which again comes back to the point which I've said before, is I think as the family member you have to deal with your own anger and stuff like that, because if not, it just bottles up, and especially in times like that is when it really comes out. So I think that's where you kind of have to be careful, and it's so easy to get angry, and that's what you want to do, but it doesn't make it any better, and that just makes it worse for the addict.
Yeah, and there were times that I had been doing things like over and over and over again, like you're talking about like exploding, that like my mom and I were the ones that definitely had the like altercations whenever things would explode, or they were emotionally bankrupt from me from because of what I had done. So like there were times that like we should have sat down and had a conversation prior to those moments.
Mm-hmm.
In their defense, a conversation wouldn't have went very far. Lots of times, because obviously like my mind was clouded, like my judgment was clouded. But like I guess what I'm saying is like there were times in my life where I thought like doing MAT was like the best choice for me at the time, and I think that's where like there were times that my parents did support that, and like I went and got on Suboxone and was seeing a doctor, and they did support that avenue, but then they started to see that like I was abusing that, so that wasn't something they supported anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So but we never had like conversations about, hey, like your behavior is no different than when you were getting high, you know what I mean? Like it was just kind of like they became resentful because I was doing that. So, and
that stuff's easy to do. That's what like and I feel like from the family's perspective, anger, guilt, resentment, all of that are rightful emotions. Like I'm not saying that you shouldn't feel that way. Like those are all 100% valid, rightful emotions that you should go through, but you have to go through them to deal with it. But you have to deal with it before you can do anything to even try to be there for the addict.
Yeah, and I think, like ultimately the thing that worked the best for me is when I started like digging deep, working with the therapist, working with just different professionals and people in recovery. Like I have both ends of it. Like for me, recovery wasn't just like a single thing, like a black and white thing. Like for my recovery, I have several different things I have to work on: my mental health, my addictions, my spirituality, working on boundaries and codependent relationships. Like all those things have played like it's had its own part in my recovery now. So I'm constantly working on myself, and it's exhausting. But like, I talked to my family about it. I talked to y'all about it, like, probably till y'all are like tired of hearing about it. But like, I don't know, those first 2 years of sobriety, like, you go through, if you are gonna sit and take a look at yourself, like, it's just gonna take a lot of talking about it.
So from like the addict's perspective, what would you recommend to like a parent who's dealing with it, or
like with a child, like with somebody just getting into it?
Yeah.
I mean, so I think the first time that my parents knew there was a problem, like, let's try to like find a solution, was when I don't even remember how old I was, somewhere between 20 and 22, I don't know, somewhere in between there. But I had I went to like an outpatient program. I was not ready. I was kind of forced to go. It was kind of like either this or this. Like, you either go there or, So, no matter, like, the first time I was forced into it, I still heard the message. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think that, like, when I first started using, I was like 16, 17. My parents had no idea. I kept it hidden really well. But I lied back then. But had my parents known that I was like using pills and like just doing the most, I wish they would have like forced me into it, like forced me to go see somebody or to a treatment center. Do I think it would have worked then? No, but I don't think I would have ever been able to get high the same again.
Right.
And that's the thing. Once you hear the message, like, you can never successfully get high again, because you know that there's like an outlet, that there's a solution. So that's why, like, for me, every time I've went back out there, it's gotten worse mentally, because like I knew I didn't have to be living like that.
Right.
So to answer your question, just see what all, like, if, as a parent, I feel like, don't give them that option. Like, ask for help. There's people in the community that would be more than willing to like guide you in the right direction. Reach out. Get somebody else's help, because sometimes like getting your emotions out of it and getting, asking for help from somebody that just knows what they're talking about,
So I have another question about that. So, like, I feel like in a lot of situations, the problem with like the parent and the child, especially if it's a younger child, is the fear of like losing that relationship. You know what I mean? Like, if they were to force their child to go to rehab or see somebody because the child doesn't see anything wrong with what they're doing, like, in that situation, like, what do you recommend? Do you still recommend like?
Yeah, the alternative there is to losing your child. Because, I mean, like...
How do you, like, approach it? Like, what do you think would be the best... what's the most receptive message, I guess?
Just to sit down and, like, not just, like, be... when I say, like, force it, I mean, like, you're going to rehab, like that. But just, like, we've got to do something about this. Like, and there's what... the delivery is
That's
key
what I was getting
at. The delivery is key. Like, but everybody... isn't receptive to the same type of... I mean, I know I have friends that type of... they were more receptive to, like, saying, like, this is what you're doing. You have no option. Like, but then I have friends who would take off running from that. Like, they would go on the run.
So it's kind of
you got to know your kid.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Know your child and think about how you're going to deliver the message before you do it. Like,
and again, seek help. Yeah. Ask a professional. Like, this is how my kid is. Like, how should I, how should I approach this? But ultimately, your kid, your family. Take your emotions out of it. Like, I know I kept my parents sick for a long time just trying to make me well. And that's that's like one of our main messages. The addict is not the only one that is affected by this. Mm-hmm. I mean, my parents still have, like, I can tell they're still triggered by different things. Now, had you asked my parents 10 years ago, like, what would you recommend we do with our kid, their answer would be completely different than what it is now.
Yeah, I agree.
Because they've learned what hasn't worked and what does work.
Mm-hmm.
So we've called my mom to ask her. She's on speakerphone on the phone. So, Mom, if you had to give one bit of advice to parents who have just figured out that their child is actively using, what bit of advice would you give them as a parent who's went through over a decade of that?
The first thing I would tell them is, don't be naive to think it's only going to happen one time. Get involved, bring it to the attention of your child, be their parent. Don't try to be their friend. Blow it up to where you know that they know that you're going to do something about it. If they deny it, don't believe them because they're going to lie to you. So don't be their friend, be their parent.
So, like, what you're saying is, like, if you say I'm going to make you go to rehab, like, follow through with that.
Definitely. Just make them know that you're not going to tolerate that behavior in your home. Just if you tolerate it being there in your house, then that's saying that you give them a green light to do what they're doing. So for your sanity and for their health, the best thing to do is just get it out in the open and don't enable them and don't tolerate it.
So is there anything, last question, is there anything you wish, like, back then that you would have done differently?
Probably not, because that was something that you had to come to terms with yourself. And if we would have tried to force you to stop, I think it would just push you harder to do it. You know, you can't really say, you know, if I did this, this would have done this, if that could have, you know, you just had to find your way.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Although I just said that we just talked about it. I said, like, parents, like, early on, if I wish that you guys would have forced me into it. But you're probably right. I would have went harder.
Well, that goes back to the point of us saying, like, it depends on your child. Like, you have to know your child to know what to do for them.
I just think most kids, they're not going to come clean to their parents. They're going to deny it. They're going to say, you know, oh, it's just one time, you know, and most parents want to believe that because you don't want to think of your child being a drug user, you know, and you think, oh, well, they are experimenting. Some kids do. Some kids come back. But today's world
Not
now,
your kid.
What?
I said, not your kid.
It doesn't matter whose kid. But the thing of it is, today's world, experimenting can cause immediate death because of what's in
for
the
sure.
drugs.
In all seriousness.
You know, you could, you know, yes, kids took pills, kids did this, but now that the fentanyl's out there so much, you know, they might experiment one time and not make it.
Yeah.
It's not something that they can experiment with. I mean, it's just got to be black or white on that nowadays.
I agree.
Agreed. All right, thanks. We'll see you later. So it was good to hear, like, my mom's point of view, and like what we shared about earlier seems a little contradicting, but like thinking back to like when my mom first approached me with that, like I wasn't willing to admit that I was using. I was still trying to like live this double life, like everything's fine. Just that I was like this social user or whatever, and I don't even think I'd admit to that. So I was closed off to.
In that sense, forcing you to go to rehab would not have worked for you.
Right.
It would have made you run, probably.
So, but what I think is if the conversation like goes where like your child is admitting that's when, because like by the time I got to the point where, you know, I feel like I was like living step one, like I admitted that my life was unmanageable. I'm powerless over alcohol and drugs. Like, that is literally step one. So, if you're at that point, then, like, when I finally was like, yes, I'm using, which wasn't until, like, 2 years ago. But that's when, like, then you have that. Like, you've told me you're using. Like, you're admitting it. So, and at that point, if the person might be more receptive to, like, getting some sort of treatment if they're admitting that they're getting high.
So when they're not, then what do you say? I would say, like, if they're not, like, just from my point of view, I can't say this from your point of view, but, like, I think you still, like your mom said, everything she said was really good, I think, like, especially, like, they're not going to admit it. Probably they're going to lie to you. Like, you have to expect it and don't believe them, but when they say it's just one time, don't believe that because it's not true. But I think in that sense, then you still have to find ways that you could help them in whatever way you can. So
here's the thing. She used to threaten me all the time with, I'm going to drug test you, and she never followed through with it. So
I think that's a huge thing.
When she wouldn't follow through with it, I would just go a little bit harder, a little bit longer. And there was one time where she's like, I'm taking you downtown right now. And I literally jumped out of her car because I was like, oh my God, she's serious. You know what I mean? And, jumped out the car and started walking down the street because I knew she was serious. But, that's when you have to,
I feel like I saw that a lot through, your addiction or just, even talking to people I know. That is a huge thing with parents, and it's always easy to, be the parent and, threaten them in a sense, but you have to follow through with your word, because if you don't, for one, that it almost shows that you're not unreliable. I don't want to say that, but you not following through with your word, they know next time when the same thing happens and the same situation happens, you're not going to follow through with it, and then they know how to play you. That's exactly what happens. And I think so. Following through, if you're going to drug test them. I mean, you can get them into counseling. Counseling doesn't hurt anybody. Right. It doesn't have to necessarily, just those steps, taking those steps if they're not going to admit it. Because I feel also if you have your child get into counseling or something like that, if they're actually working it and doing it right, eventually the addiction is going to get brought up, and surely, you hope that then they would admit it, and then you can go further and they're working, you know what I mean?
Well, and even if the addiction isn't brought up, you're going to be able to pinpoint some, for me, because whenever looking back on times where I spoke with a counselor prior to my addiction being the forefront of my issues, I spoke about the things that affected me, and those were the reasons why I got high, you know. And for me, in my recovery this time, why it's been so I feel like it's been successful is because I started looking at those things that were possibly the reason that I chose to get high. So yeah, counseling is great for everyone. But yeah, biggest thing, when my parents started following through with their words, well, we're gonna call social services on you, we're gonna make that's when I was oh, skirt, hold up, I'm not trying to do this no more.
I think another thing is too, when your parents, for at the beginning, anytime you obviously, the enabling is there always from the beginning, so when they stopped enabling you and started following through with the words, I feel this last time around, they didn't give you a place to live.
Yeah, and they cut me off.
Right, and they rightfully should have at that point, you know? I think they did what they should have, but, when they started doing those things, that made a huge difference, too.
And calling me out. There were times where I would, steal money from them, and they would never, I knew they knew, and they knew that I knew, but, it was never talked about. This time, they would be, immediately. They would set me up for, and they would be we know you took that money. And I would still lie through my teeth, but, I knew they knew, And so, that's the thing. But that's where it got to, that's a decade of addiction and stuff. Until this time, I wasn't receptive to them, calling me out. So this time when they called me out, ooh.
And this might not be something everybody agrees with, but I almost think sometimes yes, you have to be there for them, but you also have to let them fall. You have to in some aspect you have to let them fall, because if you're sitting there, that's part of the enabling though. If you're sitting there giving them everything, they're out of money, okay, here's money, they're stealing money from you, you're not saying anything, when you're enabling those habits, they're gonna keep doing it. But the minute they fall at least a little and realize that they're having to do things for themselves, that makes them realize a lot more too.
Well, and here's the thing. When I would steal money and get away with it, or do whatever, I'd get away with it, then I would do double what I did before, or my drug use would double also, because it's it's easy access. I'm being able to feed my addiction without any kind of consequence. You know what I mean? So even though I wasn't consciously thinking about I'm doing something wrong and that's not okay, before, I think I struggled with after things would happen, thinking it was a moral thing. It wasn't. I was literally on fight or flight mode, survival mode. I need something to feed my addiction to feel better, and that's you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's I'm not having to go jump through a lot of hoops to feed my addiction. Mm-hmm. So it just got worse and worse and worse. But when it got cut off, whenever that easy access got cut off, that's when I started doing more severe criminal behavior, catching felonies. And that's
In
literally...
the end, that's what got you caught. And
Yeah, and, you know, this last rip, though, like, okay, so I'm in drug court now off charges that are from 2016. And, like, this last time in active addiction, like, something in me spiritually changed because I couldn't do any of that. Like, I literally could not do any of that criminal.
yeah.
Like, I mean, obviously I was selling and using drugs. That's criminal. But, like I wasn't able to, like, steal. Like, something in me, like, that God conscious. Like, I could not steal. I could not. And it's, I mean, I think about other people, and even using this last time. Like, before, I was tired of hurting people. Point blank. Because I had, like, that's something I've had to come to terms with, too. Like, there are some things that I haven't been able to make amends with, of things I've done in my active addiction, and it might not ever happen. I've worked on some stuff, you know, in case that never does happen, but I am a bad guy in some people's story, and I have had to come to terms with that. Like, I've done bad things, I've done hurtful things, and there's some people that will never forgive me, and that's just something like, am I aware that I hurt them? 100%. Does it affect me? 100%. Do I have guilt and shame over that? 100%. Like, I see them out, and I know what I've done to you. You know what I mean? But that's just something I'm learning in the program. Like, I've literally set up columns. Like, is this something that I can make amends with? Is this something that I'm going to catch new charges if I make amends? Like,
Yeah.
you have to work with your sponsor over that. Because there's some things that there's amends that I never were able to make because that person has passed on. So I worked with a sponsor and worked through that in different ways, because obviously I couldn't make a direct amends with them. So it was more like a spiritual thing. I wrote it out and worked through it that way, you know. So
I would say, to, like, wrap it up, what I got from all this is, like, you have to, like, there's no right or wrong answer, really. But you have to do what fits you the best. You know, like, you have to know your kid and know how they respond to things and what's going to be the best action for you and your family. But it's hard. It's hard. There's no right or wrong, and there's no book that's going to tell you how to do it. But that's kind of some insight on.
Yeah, and I think just be vocal. Like, you don't have to deal with all that on your own. Like, I think whenever you first find out your kid's using, that is like you feel like a failure. I don't know. As a parent, I feel like how I would feel. Like, you feel like you failed them in some way, but we just did this thing, like 1 in 3 people are affected in some way from addiction. Like, reach out. There's so many people that have went through on both ends of it. Like, just ask for help. You don't have to do it alone, you know.
Yeah, I do think, like, if I like, looking back, if there was one thing I could change, like, in myself through it, would be, like, I wish I were able to be more vocal with you. Like, that's why I say, like, I sit here and can say that I never was able to be honest with you. Like, I just couldn't. It just wasn't in me to be honest with you. But I do know, like, I talked about a couple weeks ago too, like, the first time you were honest with me, how I felt was totally different. Like, it took so, like, even you want to know, you know, like, as a family member, you want to, or just as a person, you want to know the truth about everything. But once you know, it just, I feel like it makes you sadder in some sense, but also makes you not feel as crazy, you know. And so I do wish that I could have called you out on it, because I think it just would have made a world of a difference.
Yeah.
For both of us. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We still have t-shirts available if anybody would like one. They're $20. And we will deliver them to you. So thank you guys for all your support.
Keep coming back.
Keep coming back. Bye, guys.